That's
So,
that's what it is, kind of.
Yeah, it's coming through.
Now it's coming through.
oh, so no one heard what you had to say?
No one heard what I had to say.
No,
It probably wasn't all that
no,
eloquent anyway.
No,
Maybe
you're
we
gonna
have
have to
the
do
call. I
something.
don't know. It's pretty important.
People could decode my.
That was really good.
Your
Why don't you
gestures.
just
Yeah.
recap quickly?
All right, so for those who are watching me pantomime for about 5 minutes, I basically talked about a few different things. Thank you for coming to the class. This is the second part in a series where Dennis Speed is going through Edgar Poe, and this is part two. You can find the first part on my YouTube channel or on my Twitter. If you go through my past broadcasts, I think it is a very good class. And then I was talking about how we're meeting now on the precipice of World War III, and that there hasn't been a nuclear bomb drop just yet, but that basically could happen at any minute. And the reason I was talking about that was because I was recapping what happened this morning on the International Peace Coalition call, which started with an interview between Mike Billington and the former Prime Minister of Malaysia. And his name is escaping me here at the moment. Mahathir. And this guy, even though he is 99 years old, sounds completely sober and clear-minded. That means this guy, if he's 99, was born in 1925. So that means this guy has been living through quite a lot of history, but also involved in making that history. And there were attempts to loot the Malaysian government and turn it into one of these bankrupt nations that would be dependent on places like the IMF in the 70s and 80s, specifically attempts by people like Henry Kissinger and George Soros, who were pressuring the prime minister to adopt their predatory financial policies to bankrupt Malaysia. And instead of that happening, the prime minister resisted those efforts. And as a result of him resisting those efforts, he was called a follower of the LaRouche conspiracy theorists, or that he was a follower of the Lyndon LaRouche conspiracy theories. This is something that he was being slandered with in the 80s. But he held his own. He stuck to his guns. And as a result, Malaysia did not become bankrupted like some other nations were looted by people like Soros and Kissinger and others. And I think there was also a direct confrontation where the former prime minister asked Soros directly, and Soros had denied that that's what he was trying to do. In any case, then that was also followed up by people like Helga Zepp-LaRouche and Scott Ritter on this morning's IPC call, where basically Scott Ritter said, look, that's it. We're pretty much over. It's pretty much almost endgame. And his job, as he says, is he likes to put fear into the hearts of people, of whoever is listening. And he outlined the somewhat reality of the situation that, yes, is it the case that we are on the verge of thermonuclear war and total destruction? Yes. Does that mean you should just hide in a hole somewhere and die? No, quite the opposite. It means now more than ever, it is required for people to act. But you can't just act. You don't go out in the streets with a gun or something stupid and make the situation worse for yourself. You have to know how to think, especially in a time of crisis. How do you think when you are under pressure, when you are facing an existential threat, when you are face down with an enemy whose very intent is to kill you? That is why we are doing this whole class series. That's why we started it. That's the thing that makes us different from any other campaign, is because we don't see you like pawns of people who just go out in the streets and tell people to vote for XYZ candidate. We actually care about the people that we say we want to represent. We want to educate the people we want to represent, because government and policy should be dictated by the citizenry. The citizenry should be as educated as the person representing them in whatever office it is. It should be a collaborative process. And the congressman or whoever should have the final say on whatever policy and whatever vote they're going to do. But it should always be a dialogue. And that requires an educated population. And that is why I'm happy to introduce Dennis Speed, who is doing a class on Edgar Poe, whose cottage is only 2 miles north from here up in Kingsbridge Road on the border of the district. Sure, he's across the street from the district, but our community doesn't end or begin at arbitrary district lines or congressional lines. Our community begins and ends wherever people need us. And that happens to be everywhere, all the time, everywhere. And so, Dennis, you can take it from here.
Well, Poe, like most people in the Bronx, doesn't seem to be able to catch a break. It's very difficult to talk about him, not because the subject is difficult, but because, as with someone like Lyndon LaRouche, there are already preconceptions that exist about who he is, which run so counter to everything that anyone says, that that is to say, the preconceptions run in such a fashion that if you say something, what you're saying will run counter to what everyone says about that individual. We'll give you an example of that with, actually, let's do this given the time. Let's do a couple of those videos. And I just want to, if people have probably heard of this individual, if you've heard of his name as being Edgar Allan Poe, he never used that name. Just to start us off. So let's play a few of the typical, relatively typical video sort of descriptions of Poe.
For generations, the nightmares of millions have been fueled by the demons of one man.
Can you think of any writers darker than Edgar Allan Poe? There can't be many who were as original, as prolific, or who dealt with such somber and macabre themes. But what led Poe to develop his fascination with the bleaker aspects of life? And what effect did it have on his mind? And how did he end up disoriented, incoherent, and wearing another man's clothes on a Baltimore street in 1849?
Once upon a midnight dreary, while I pondered weak and weary over many a quaint and curious volume of forgotten lore, while I nodded, nearly napping, suddenly there came a tapping as of someone gently rapping at my chamber door. "'Tis some visitor," I muttered, tapping at my chamber door, "only this and nothing more."
Okay, now we could have elaborated these, but both for time reasons and because none of this has anything to do with Edgar Poe, we're stopping. I have one or two things to say, but we have something in contrast, which someone else did, which at least gives you some notion of the individual. Let's go ahead and play that that way we, again, can abbreviate a bit.
June 1827, Poe self-publishes his first volume of poetry, Tamerlane and Other Poems. The work is published anonymously, the author identifying himself only as a Bostonian. But it receives virtually no reviews or attention. Only 50 copies are printed, of which 12 have survived. Amazingly, this 40-page pamphlet, completely ignored when published, has become the most valuable work in American literature. He spends the first 6 months as a company clerk stationed at Fort Independence on Castle Island in Boston Harbor. By all accounts, he adjusts quite well to military life. After 6 months, Poe's battery is ordered to Fort Moultrie on Sullivan's Island in Charleston Harbor, South Carolina.
I think the Army looked attractive to him. So he joined the Army, and he achieved the rank of Sergeant Major. He was called an artificer. He was the guy that created the gunpowder for the bombs, for the cannonballs. And that was a very dangerous but very important job, because when you would shoot off the cannon towards the enemy, you wanted to make sure the cannonball didn't explode in the cannon or on your side. So he created the gunpowder mixture to make sure that it went where it was supposed to go. A very important job. And he excelled in the Army.
Sullivan's Island would be the setting for Poe's most popular short story, The Gold Bug, in which a man and his servant hunt for buried treasure. The Gold Bug directly influenced Robert Louis Stevenson's Treasure Island 4 decades later. Stevenson even credits Poe in his preface. The Gold Bug also popularizes cryptography, or secret writing, as the character decodes a cipher to locate the treasure.
Poe helped popularize the use of cryptograms in fiction. In his story, The Gold Bug, he has the character who finds a piece of parchment with nothing on it. When he holds it over a flame, reveals that written in invisible ink, there's a code. When he decodes the message, it gives him a series of clues he has to follow to find a buried treasure. So this is the plot of Da Vinci Code, National Treasure, even the Goonies. It all goes back to The Gold Bug. And it was a huge hit. It was Poe's most popular story during his lifetime, even adapted into a stage play while he was still alive. And people thought he was a genius for creating this new kind of story. Now, cryptograms have been around for a long time, usually used by the military. It was a great way to sneak messages across enemy lines. And remember, Poe was in the military, so this is probably where he learned about cryptography.
Later in his career, Poe wrote a wildly popular newspaper column asking readers to send ciphers for him to decode. Many readers enthusiastically sent him all kinds of ciphers, which Poe unfailingly solved and published the answers in his column. William Friedman was widely considered the most preeminent cryptologist in U.S. history, who broke the Japanese purple cipher that helped the Allies defeat Japan in World War II. Friedman was introduced to cryptology by reading The Gold Bug as a boy.
It is a curious fact that popular interest in this country in the subject of cryptography received its first stimulus from Edgar Allan Poe. Should a psychological test be made, the word cipher would doubtless bring for most laymen the immediate response Poe or the gold bug. The fame of Poe rests not a little on his activities with cipher, and much of the esteem in which this American genius is held today rests in part on the legend of Poe the cryptographer.
Okay. So, if you just go on the internet, you'll read about Poe the drunk, Poe the drug addict, Poe the bipolar personality. You won't read about Poe the sergeant major, Poe the cryptographer, and so on. Now, obviously, someone knows because this is also on the internet, so you can find some reference. But you may notice something else. What was also said was that he was immensely popular, but it was also said that the first book of his poetry, when it was published, was self-published. Well, one of the reasons for that was that he was 18 years old when it was first published. He had no money because his father refused to support him. He wasn't really his father, it was his stepfather. His father had been deceased and his mother was deceased. Both were dead by the time he was 2 years old. He was adopted. So we've now established that there is at least a different person than the one that is being now popularly represented as being Edgar Poe. But there's another problem. If you, for example, as Kynan tried to do, I just asked him to find me the introduction, the Poe's story, Murders in the Rue Morgue, on the internet. So he looked. And I don't know, Kynan, if you want to come out and tell this story, or you can tell it from there, whichever one makes sense. Because I'd rather that you say what happened.
Yeah, I could tell it out here.
Yeah, why don't you?
Yeah, so I was just trying to find this story on the internet. And there was one version that came up. I can, just read the first few sentences or so.
Read the one that you thought wasn't.
Yeah, so there were two that came up. Actually, let me just put it on I could just put it up.
Okay, and then you can read it off, sure.
Yeah. So that's the first one that comes up. Paris. In Paris it was, in the summer of 1840. There I first met that strange and interesting young fellow, Auguste Dupin. Dupin was the last member of a well-known family, a family which had once been rich and famous. He himself, however, was far from rich. He cared little about money. He had enough to buy the most necessary things of life and a few books. He did not trouble himself about the rest. Just books. With books, he was happy. So that's the first one I found. I figured that wasn't the version, so I kept on looking, and this was the second one that Wikipedia provided. What song the siren sang, or what name Achilles assumed when he hid himself among women, although puzzling questions, are not beyond all conjecture. Sir Thomas Browne. The mental features discoursed of as the analytical are, in themselves, but little susceptible of analysis. We appreciate them only in their effects. We know of them, among other things, that they are always to their possessor, when inordinately possessed, a source of the liveliest enjoyment. As the strong man exults in his physical ability, delighting in such exercises as call his muscles into action, so glories the analyst in that moral activity which disentangles. He derives pleasure from even the most trivial occupations, bringing his talent into play. He is fond of enigmas, of conundrums, of hieroglyphics, exhibiting in his solutions of each a degree of acumen which appears to the ordinary apprehension preternatural. His results, brought about by the very soul and essence of method, have, in truth, the whole air of intuition. So that was the one I thought was the correct version.
And neither of them are.
Oh.
So what we're going to do, put up the first one again, and I'm going to have you read sentence by sentence. And we'll compare the passage from which that is taken in the case of the first one.
You want me to just start?
What you do is you read one sentence and then I read a sentence.
Okay.
Okay.
Paris. In Paris it was, in the summer of 1840. There I first met that strange and interesting young fellow, Auguste Dupin.
Okay. Residing in Paris during the spring and part of the summer of 18 I there contracted an intimacy with Monsieur C. Auguste Dupin.
Dupin was the last member of a well-known family, a family which had once been rich and famous. He himself, however, was far from rich. He cared little about money. He had enough to buy the most necessary things of life, and a few books. He did not trouble himself about the rest, just books. With books he was happy.
The young gentleman was of an excellent, indeed of an illustrious family, but by a variety of untoward events had been reduced to such poverty that the quondam energy of his character succumbed beneath it, and he ceased to bestir himself in the world, or to care for the retrieval of his fortunes. By courtesy of his creditors, there still remained in his possession a small remnant of his patrimony, and upon the income arising from this, he managed, by means of a rigorous economy, to procure the necessaries of life, without troubling himself about its superfluities. Books, indeed, were his sole luxuries, and in Paris, these are easily obtained.
We first met when we were both trying to find the same book. As it was a book which few had ever heard of, this chance brought us together in an old bookstore. Later we met again in the same store, then again in another bookstore. Soon we began to talk.
Our first meeting was at an obscure library in the Rue Montmartre, where the accident of our both being in search of the very same rare and very remarkable volume brought us into closer communication. We saw each other again and again. I was deeply interested in the family history which he detailed to me with all the candor which a Frenchman indulges only when self is his theme. I was astonished, too, at the vast extent of his reading, and above all, I felt my soul enkindled within me by the wild fervor and what I could only term the vivid freshness of his imagination. Okay, I think that's probably enough.
Yeah.
I think you see. Now you may ask, but why? Is it that the story reads better in this other version, which is not what he wrote? Was it that they couldn't fit the text? All right. By the way, and it is not the beginning of the story. In fact, the story has a full 3 pages, 2.5 pages before that section. So now I'm going to read you the actual beginning, which was in part is indicated by the quote, which you did here. What song the sirens sang, or what name Achilles assumed when he hid himself among women, although puzzling questions are not beyond all conjecture. Sir Thomas Browne. That was quoted exactly as it should have been. Here is the opening paragraph. It is not improbable that a few farther steps in phrenological science, that means bumps on the head, okay? The old idea when you talk about, intelligence with bumps on the head. It's not improbable that a few farther steps in phrenological science will lead to a belief in the existence, if not to the actual discovery and location, of an organ of analysis. If this power, which may be described, although not defined, as the capacity for resolving thought into its elements, be not in fact an essential portion of what late philosophers term ideality, by which he just means it's like an ideal. It operates in the mind alone. Then there are indeed many good reasons for supposing it a primitive faculty. That it may be a constituent of ideality is here suggested in opposition to the vulgar dictum founded among the assumptions of grave authority, that the calculating and discriminating powers, causality and comparison, are at variance with the imaginative, that the three in short can hardly coexist. But although thus opposed to received opinion, the idea will not appear ill-founded when we observe that the processes of invention or creation are strictly akin with the processes of resolution. The former, or calculation, you could also call it. The former being nearly, if not absolutely, the latter conversed. it cannot be doubted that the mental faculties discoursed of as the analytical are in themselves but little susceptible of analysis. Now, everything that you heard in the second version now occurs as it was written. Why? In the first class, we showed the same thing. Why? Why is this being done? What did Edgar Poe do? Is it just that he moved to the Bronx? Could be, I guess, because you can't get a break in the Bronx.
I just
Yes,
realized one more thing. The Wikipedia page to this story, it actually provides the original facsimile, which is what you just read, but they link to the slide that I had shown.
Right, that's the point. You were simply looking for it. You didn't know exactly what it would say.
Right.
And like anyone else that wouldn't know, you got something that you presumed, especially when you compared it to the other version, to be the real one.
Yeah.
Thereby hangs the problem of whether or not it will be possible to save, if you wish to do that, Western civilization or any civilization at all. To save it from artificial intelligence, to save it from the internet, to save it from the various archivists that are presently doing their best to falsify various records of all sorts in all cultures at this time. What you are living through is well described in the novel 1984, where the character, the protagonist, Winston Smith, has a job, and his job is that he's supposed to change the headlines from the past, so that when you go to research something, everything is different. That's what he does. That's his job. So no one in the society ever can know what the case is. It's said, and I don't know that it's actually true, that the former director of the CIA, Bill Casey, once made the remark that when the American people believe, when 80% of what people believe is completely false, then we will have succeeded. Now, there's an important thing to understand here also, which goes a little deeper. It's also the case that the most important thing for brainwashing people is not telling them what to think. It's telling them how to think. And there are many different examples of this, but we don't want to take a lot of time here. I will cite a kind of opposite example of that. Whatever you may think of the podcast or whatever you want to call it, personality, Candace Owens. Some of you would be aware that, of course, she used to work for a very pro-Israeli group, Ben Shapiro and the whole crew there. And, of course, she came through the whole Dennis Prager operation, too. But she got confronted by Norman Finkelstein, who she brought on her show because she didn't know anything. I mean, she was honest enough to say, I don't understand what this whole war is. So, let's have some people on. And she knew that Norman Finkelstein didn't think what other people who were Jewish thought about Zionism, Israel, and the war. And what happened was he was on with her. She was 8 months pregnant. And he simply said to her, Candace, you're about to be a mother. Now, if you're in Gaza and the hospital has been bombed and the doctors have been killed, what happens to your kid? Now, what happened was it wasn't done in some confrontational way. He wasn't even trying in any sense he wasn't doing a gotcha kind of moment. He was actually trying to get her to think, because he realized, of course, that she truly didn't understand the conflict. She didn't have a background in the conflict. She's 35 years old, and she was actually not particularly political until a certain period of her life. And there was no way that she would have been able to, on her own, even if she had, let's say, dropped out and tried to take several months to investigate it, that she could have understood this. So it was important that, and in her then confronting this and then beginning to ask questions, suddenly she, of all people, became identified as an anti-Semite. And this then really incensed her because she knew exactly what she had done to get to the point that she got and why she had asked the question she had asked. Now, she also happens to be a deeply religious person. And whatever you may think about that, again, this also kicked in because she had an idea, and this is when she began to use the term the synagogue of Satan. Now, this, of course, didn't make her very many friends among the AIPAC crowd, but she wasn't saying that to do more than to try to get a grip, as she understood that the people who claimed to be Jews and Zionists were trying to get a grip, claiming they were operating from a religious perspective. That's what they were saying, that our conception of our state comes from our religion. We believe that we have been given this land by God. Well, she's a religious person, and her point was, well, wait a minute, my whole entire conception of what right and wrong is, and what I have to answer to is that there's an afterlife, and I've got to answer for what it is I'm advocating and I'm doing here. And I can't advocate the killing of women and children en masse under the pretext that this has to be done for war. I can't do that. So what happened in this case is that she found herself at complete odds with these people and was, in fact, then quickly, deplatformed. She was fired, all sorts of things, because that kind of thing could be done. So this is important to say, not because of her, but just because that happens to be an example that would be well known. She's a person that's well known. You can look up the example. And then, of course, she began to ask questions about many other things. And much of what she asks questions about and many of her answers, I completely disagree with. But what I don't disagree with is the fact that she's trying to investigate to determine what is true. Brainwashing is most importantly done by teaching people not to think. One of the ways you can do that? If you can get people to believe that everything is not true, then you can manipulate them more easily than in any other state. There's somebody that had made a reference to that, somebody well known actually in her own right, one named Hannah Arendt. I just want to read the brief quote from her, if I can pull it up here, just so you have a sense of what it is that the people who actually run things, if you were to put it that way, which are how they think about things, how they think about the human mind. Okay. So here's her quote. This constant lying is not aimed at making people believe a lie, but at ensuring that no one believes anything anymore. A people that can no longer distinguish between truth and lies cannot distinguish between right and wrong. And such a people, deprived of the power to think and judge, is, without knowing and willing it, completely subjected to the rule of lies. With such a people, you can do whatever you want. And that is what is happening to us right now. That is the purpose of what you see that's going on. And hence, studying someone like Edgar Poe might be interesting if we could now, for a minute, segue to why he would be suppressed. Why suppress these stories? He's supposed to be a master of horror, master of suspense, and so forth. Well, yes, there are a few things he did. He did invent the detective story. And the story that we were just talking about, The Murders in the Rue Morgue, is the first story of its type ever written. It's where all other forms of that genre come from. No one had ever conceived of or written stories of that type. In fact, the Adventures of Sherlock Holmes, all those stories were written against Poe. That's not something we'll take up here. That's something we can take up at another time. But Arthur Conan Doyle was a British intelligence agent, was writing against Poe and Edgar Poe's method of analysis, because what he knew was that Poe was actually a member of the Secret Intelligence Services of the United States. Now, we told a bit of that story last week. I'm just going to reference something about it here. Washington, Franklin, John Jay, Hamilton, and George Marshall in particular were the heads and primary operatives within an intelligence network that was established by Franklin really from the period of about 1722, when Franklin was 16 years old and he went to Philadelphia, when he was sent to Philadelphia. Now, Franklin himself had operated from the age of 13 as an agent of the Mather families of Massachusetts, and he was a writer. And he wrote under the pseudonym Silence Dogood. He later, when he came to Philadelphia, that was when he was 13. When he was 16 and he came to Philadelphia, he, within approximately 6 months of arriving in Philadelphia, formed something called the Junto, or there's a term Junta, which means coup. And what he was doing was he was organizing a society which was composed of another 12 people that he organized as a network in Philadelphia. And what he did, and he was very clear about this, is he says, well, what we're going to do is we're going to do good. Whatever needs to be done, we will figure out how to do it. So he invented the sanitation department of Philadelphia and the fire department of Philadelphia. And he created the first public library in the United States. And he did many other things of that variety. That's what they would do. And he did this over the course, of course, he was a printer by trade. He created the American Postal Service, but he did that both because it was a useful thing to have communications, but he also did it because it was the most effective way and the easiest way to collect intelligence on what would become ultimately the United States of America. They had that as a plan, although they were not necessarily going to break from England initially. That wasn't clear that they were going to do that. But he was preparing the way for that from really, as I say, the time that he was in his teens. Poe was drafted into this. The reason being that his grandfather, David Poe, the grandfather, had been a quartermaster, a supplier, logistics officer for Lafayette, Marquis de Lafayette. Now, the Marquis de Lafayette, I mentioned Franklin, but of course, Franklin was 70 years old when the American Revolution started. Washington was in his 40s, and Lafayette was in his teens. Lafayette came from Paris. He became part of the American Revolutionary leadership, military leadership. And at the time that the war concluded, in 1783, 81 through 83. What happened was that Washington and Hamilton and Jay and others formed what was called the Society of the Cincinnati, or Cincinnatus. Cincinnatus was a Roman who had become, was drafted to be literally dictator of Rome during the 6th century BC, and led a successful defense of Rome. But then became legendary because he abandoned his power and went back to his farm. He did it on 2 different occasions. He did it once because of a foreign attack, and the second time because of a big domestic insurrection. It was 20 years apart. And each time, instead of maintaining power, he gave up power. And so they created this society called the Society of the Cincinnatus, so Cincinnati or Cincinnatus. And the idea was that that would be the way that the American revolutionary forces would be organized. From that time until 1945, that was also the orientation of the American military. As of 1945, with the creation, creation and the deployment of the nuclear weapon, it was then argued that the American military had to be permanent. You had to have this permanent military structure that stayed deployed. Prior to that time, America always demobilized at the end of a war. Yes, we still had a small army, but we always got rid of our troops. The reason was that the people were supposed to be organized as a militia. And the conception was that if you had trouble in the United States, that you would go to your militia forces, which was your population. If you want to know why those people are dying in North Carolina right now, and Tennessee, and Georgia, and Florida, if you really want to know why the people died in Louisiana, it's because we destroyed this system. If you want to know why you're allowed and enabled to have mercenary groups and assassin groups running around the United States, if you really want to have an idea why the people coming through the border, and I'm not talking about, all the brown and the black people coming across, I'm talking about the drug dealing and the human sex trafficking and the child trafficking, which is coordinated and organized with the banking establishment of the United States. You want to know why that can go on? It's because you don't have a militia. Because the people would report this. You would have the intelligence would be coming to you because you wouldn't have these secret structures, which is the way in which right now the present administrations have operated, particularly since approximately 1982. We can talk a lot more about this. But I bring this up in terms of Poe because Poe's grandfather had worked and been a logistics officer for Lafayette, and he would have been a member of the Society of the Cincinnati Society. So when Lafayette visited America, this was in 1824, Poe was only 15 years old. He made sure he wanted to find David Poe, but David Poe was dead, but he met the grandson, Edgar Poe. Now, although if you look in or you go on the internet and you look up the story, what the story is that you'll get about why Poe went to the military was that his stepfather basically didn't want to pay for his education when he was in Virginia, in Richmond, which is partially true. And what happened was Poe had tried to get his own money together by gambling, which is also true. And he had lost a lot of money, and his stepfather got mad at him, which is also true. But the other part of the story was that the stepfather was also stepping out on Poe's stepmother, which is also true. And he had had several kids by two different women. And that there was a fight, basically, between Poe and the stepfather about these things. The stepfather and he never quite directly talked about it, but it was thought that Poe knew about it. Now, this is the kind of gossip stuff you'll get. And by the way, some of it may be true, but that's not what happened. What happened was when Poe was 15 years old, he met Lafayette. He was part of the honor guard. Lafayette was one of the few remaining living actual soldiers that had fought in the Revolution. And he was French, and he was the leader of the Foreign Office of the Society of Cincinnati. Poe was already writing poetry, and he was articulate, precocious. So he went to school when he was 17 in Virginia, like I said, and all the things I said happened at that point. But what happened was when Mr. Allen basically, he decided, like, I'm paying for this stuff one time, but that's it. Okay? From here on in, you're just on your own. Well, Poe then went to Boston. That's the thing that you saw in the video. And he became the sergeant major, and things were going well. So then he got nominated to go to West Point. West Point was the headquarters of the Society of Cincinnati. It was the headquarters for the people who had fought the revolution and were now the descendants, the first order descendants, first line of descendants from the revolution. Poe, while he was there, wrote poetry, and there's this peculiar thing that happened where he is said to have been kicked out of West Point. There are various stories about this, but when he left West Point, the students gave him enough money to have that book of poetry that they told you about here reprinted. So they were helping him get started. And basically what Poe's job was, as a alumnus of this group, was to promote in America, together with other writers. There were some other people doing this, like Samuel Morse was doing a bit of this, James Fenimore Cooper was doing a bit of this, Washington Irving was doing a bit of this. They were trying to create a non-British, anti-British cultural offensive in America to define an identity for America, because they recognized that they were going to be fighting an ongoing battle against the British imperial forces. Of what kind? Well, they had to establish an economy, for one thing, because you can't win a revolution just by having a military victory. That doesn't do it. You got to have an economy. How do you run your credit, currency, trade, production, protection of new industries? How does this work? Then questions like slavery. How do you handle this? Because slavery is a commercial question as much as it is a moral question. So these were the things that were characteristic. But since we have a particular crisis right now, which we all know we have, what I want to do is to now just conclude by introducing an element from Poe that is just a way of sort of getting into the inside of how he thought of thinking. How did he think about thinking? Now, for this, I need two people. Did you guys have? I actually have them. If you don't, the Power of Words.
Yeah, it's right there. I don't know what version. Oh no, that's on the table.
I think this is right. Yeah,
I've got two versions. I've got two of them. Let me see. What you got? You got
this one. Yeah.
Because I want this to be read. Two volunteers.
I can be one of them if you'd like.
Okay, great. So you're one of them. And I want you to go down to.
I'm be Oinos.
Robert, you do the other one.
Oh, you wanna?
Oh yeah, great. Great. Come on. No, I'm sorry.
You have a version too? Because I think we only have one copy of the Power of Words.
Oh yeah, I got one.
Those are the other.
Oh, this is the other part of the conversation of Harris and Sherman.
Yeah, don't worry. I got a couple of them.
Okay.
So.
And the other copy?
She's pulling.
Yeah, I'm pulling it up here to make sure, and it'll be interesting. If you find that it's different, let us know. Could be.
Otherwise, I can pull it up on my phone.
Don't worry about it. It's not a problem.
Right.
It's not a problem because now people got the point. So once you have the point. Yeah. Okay. 171. Here it is. The Power Words. Okay. So now it's two angels are talking to each other. See, and one is called Oinos, which means wine, and that's the young angel that just got there, got to heaven.
Wine is in the drinking wine?
Yeah.
Or?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And Agathis, which means the good.
Right.
Okay.
Who do you want to be? You want to be the good? Or I'll be the good?
I'll be the good.
Yeah,
Okay.
right. That's actually probably right. So.
I mean.
Okay. Pardon, Agathos, the weakness of the spirit new fledged with immortality.
Hold on, one thing. I'll read slowly so people can hear what's being said. And at one point, I'm going to tell you guys to stop. Go ahead.
Pardon, Agathos, the weakness of a spirit new fledged with immortality,
You have spoken nothing, my Ornos, for which pardon is to be demanded. Not even here is knowledge a thing of intuition. For wisdom ask of the angels freely, that it may be given.
But in this existence, I dreamed that I should be at once cognizant of all things, and thus at once happy in being cognizant of all.
Ah, not in knowledge is happiness, but in the acquisition of knowledge. In forever knowing, we are forever blessed. But to know all were the curse of a fiend.
But does not the Most High know all?
That, since he is the most happy, must still be the one thing unknown even to him.
But since we grow hourly in knowledge, must not at last all things be known?
Look down into the abysmal distances. Attempt to force the gaze down into the multitudinous vistas of the stars, as we sweep slowly through them thus, and thus, and thus. Even the spiritual vision, is it not at all points arrested by the continuous golden walls of the universe? The walls of the myriads of shining bodies that mere number has appeared to blend into unity?
I clearly perceive that the infinity of matter is no dream.
There are no dreams in Aden. But it is here whispered that, of this infinity of matter, the sole purpose, is to afford infinite springs, at which the soul may allay the thirst to know, which is forever unquenchable within it, since to quench it would be to extinguish the soul's self. Question me then, my Oinos, freely and without fear. Come, we'll leave to the left the loud harmony of the Pleiades, and swoop outward from the throne into the starry meadows beyond Orion, where for pansies and violets and heart's ease are the beds of the
Triplicate.
And the triple tinted suns.
And now, Agathos, as we proceed, instruct me. Speak to me in the earth's familiar tones. I understood not what you hinted to me just now of the modes or of the methods of what, during mortality, we were accustomed to call creation. Do you mean to say that the Creator is not God?
I mean to say that the deity does not create.
Explain.
In the beginning, only he created the seeming creatures which are now throughout the universe, so perpetually springing into being, can only be considered as the mediate or indirect, not as the direct or immediate results of the divine creative power.
Among men, my Agathos, this idea would be considered heretical in the extreme.
Among angels, my Oinos, it is seen to be simply true.
Okay, stop right there. So what I want to do is first make sure people understand what's being said. Any comment?
Yeah.
I just take it to be a journey of enlightenment that Mr. Wine is going through regarding the actual nature of things, the cosmos. It sounds, I don't know if it sounds Platinian, sort of this emanational language of things proceeding forever and ever from some source. I'm new to this, but yeah, that sounds like.
I think that's right.
Yeah.
Well, we're also
He's
going to
coming
hear
from
again.
I'm going to say a creationist Christian view, and this is sort of like, well, actually, that's sort of sublunar. What the angels know is something,
more intuitive.
Yeah, something like that.
Right. Anybody else?
I had a comment actually.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It's all right. That considering what we've been talking about, really, is that for the most part, what struck me the most about the difference between the versions of Edgar Allan Poe that we listened to that were false and the one that was actually true was that the parts that were erased are things that noticeably now, from when I've talked to people about how they engage with other people or the way that they see themselves, even, they can't fathom bringing themselves to agree with, just because once they've been able to be lied to a point where they cannot see truth. And here, even when Agathos, in one of these paragraphs at the end of this first page, they basically explain that if you, the thirst to know, the thirst to keep learning, the thirst to keep asking questions, and the thirst to continue to understand feeds your soul. It feeds your mind. And once you stop asking, once you stop looking for truth,
Once you're satisfied.
Once you're satisfied,
Can you be satisfied?
Well, what's being said here is that even God himself is never satisfied. In certain sense, he keeps on learning. I think somewhere.
Yeah,
he says that must be
right.
the one thing even unknown to him.
Right.
Even unknown to him, there are still more things to be created. And even Agathos starts saying that, well, even the multitudes of things that are now created, they have created things themselves. And there's this multiplicity of creation that continues to learn and continues to grow and continues to find more truth. And it's just so striking to me because in my personal life, I've had conversations with people who stop wanting. They stop wanting to learn. They stop wanting to seize truth, or to seize even if it's just like giving someone advice, where it's like, hey, maybe don't do that because then you're gonna have to pay a bunch for it later. Don't park there because you're gonna get a ticket. Like, and then it's like, whatever. What am I doing? We're gonna find out really quick when then. But it's like there are simple things like that in your day-to-day life where it's like you take those, like your blasé about the consequences of just not really caring of what you've seen. And if you see that, oh yeah, it's true that there are many things that are true. Like even when I started hearing the how is it said, the hypocrisies of the people who deny themselves truth, it scared me, because there are people out there that don't believe in climate change, but will believe that there are space lasers that you can turn on and shut off to make the hurricanes. Like, there are man-made like ways that we have affected ourselves, each other, our climate, the world that we live in. But people will jump into believing conspiracy theories of the same question before they will understand that maybe we are driving around too much. Maybe we are putting too much missiles in the air, bombing our soil. I can't imagine like some countries like Cambodia who still have like bombs in their soil, and there are certain areas of our world that we can't walk into as people anymore.
Or like the people that can't figure out that you have that when you fight a war, a lot of carbon gets reduced in the air.
I wouldn't be surprised if after 9/11, we've seen the veterans that have gone into those areas and get cancer. And they've been fighting for the reparations since, to make sure that they are cared for, because they are what we as Americans would consider heroes for saving the rest of us on ground zero. And now I can't imagine the aftermath of what Gaza is going to look like for all of the people who have been breathing in the dust of those buildings for years. We can see with the context of history how those effects can happen to people, like certain areas of Hiroshima and Nagasaki that have higher cancer rates, even in Georgia, where we have different power plants and things like that in lesser funded communities that have higher rates of cancer and things like that because of the pollution and the understanding that these places just have been wrought and harmed by things that we have forgotten to or neglected to care about. And once you just, if you were to forget those things and you were to jump into the lie as opposed to the truth, then wherein the truth lies some finger to point to, someone to talk to, someone to say, we can fix this. Someone can fix. You can't fix some modem that turns on a tornado. You can't fix a modem that turns on. You can fix Chevron as a company from drilling as much oil as it does out of the ocean.
Here's what I want to do. I want you guys to read it again. Now that people who have had comments, there may be others, but read it again so people can hear up through that section.
Okay. Same character, same everything. Just do it again.
Yeah, because everybody will. You'll read it and people will see why.
Okay. No notes, director.
Okay.
No notes. So, you taking notes now? Okay. All right. Well,
From the top.
We'll take it from the top. Okay. Pardon, Agathos, the weakness of a spirit new-fledged with immortality.
You have spoken nothing, my Oinos, for which pardon is to be demanded. Not even here is knowledge a thing of intuition. For wisdom ask of the angels freely, that it may be given.
But in this existence, I dreamed that I should be at once cognizant of all things, and thus at once happy in being cognizant of all.
Not in knowledge is happiness, but in the acquisition of knowledge. And forever knowing, we are forever blessed. But to know all were the curse of a fiend.
But does not the Most High know all?
That, since he is the most happy, must still be the one thing, unknown to even him.
But since we grow hourly in knowledge, must not at last all things be known?
Look down into the abysmal distances. Attempt to force the gaze down to the multitudinous vistas of the stars as we sweep slowly through them, thus and thus and thus. Even the spiritual vision, is it not at all points arrested by the continuous golden walls of the universe? The walls of the myriads of the shining bodies, that mere number has appeared to blend into unity?
I clearly perceive that the infinity of matter is no dream.
There are no dreams in Aiden. But it is here whispered that, of this infinity of matter, the sole purpose is to afford infinite springs, at which the soul may allay this thirst to know, which is forever unquenchable within it, since to quench it would be to extinguish the soul's self. Question me then, my Oinos, freely and without fear. Come, we will leave to the left the loud harmony of the Pleiades, and swoop outward from the throne into the starry meadows beyond Orion, where for pansies and violets and heart's ease are the beds of the triplicate and the triple-tinted suns.
And now, Agathos, as we proceed, instruct me. Speak to me in the earth's familiar tones. I understood not what you hinted to me just now of the modes or of the methods of what, during mortality, we were accustomed to call creation. Do you mean to say that the Creator is not God?
I mean to say that the deity does not create.
Explain.
In the beginning only he created. The seeming creatures, which are now throughout the universe, so perpetually springing into being, can only be considered as the mediate or indirect, not as the direct or immediate results of the divine creative power.
Among men, my Agathos, this idea would be considered heretical in the extreme.
Among angels, my oinos, it is seen to be simply true.
Okay. So, anybody have anything to say or any observations having heard it the second time?
Some new text up here.
No.
I wanted to add one thing, which is this, I had taken a partial note and then a fuller one the second time it was read. But not in knowledge is happiness, but in the acquisition of happiness.
Of knowledge.
Oh, wait, let me find
And
it.
the
Acquisition of knowledge.
acquisition of knowledge. Not in knowledge is happiness, but in the acquisition of knowledge.
Yes.
And then, right, he goes on to say, in knowing we are forever blessed, and the knowledge is tied to happiness. So I was just, since we were talking about this idea of the formation of our republic and this concept of the founding fathers in the Constitution and Declaration, the idea of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, I think is very, very important. And it's almost identical with this idea that it's not in, you're not like grabbing at something like you can get to a final end and it's a hard ball that you're going after, but it's actually, as we've been discussing this, it's this constant quest. So I think this is very much parallel with, because the words in the Constitution are very, very precise. It's very simple, it's very eloquent. On the other hand, it's very complete and it's very profound. So this idea of the pursuit of happiness, the pursuit of knowledge, which is happiness, which is an identical concept. So I just want to say that I think there's very much Poe getting that conception, trying to get that conception of the way to think, which is also what the founding fathers were doing in the establishment of the republic.
I just wanted to clear something up for people who may not be familiar at all with the Pleiades. It's a group of stars in our solar system. It's 7 stars. Their nickname is also the Water Girls. It's kind of funny. And so they're just one of the things. Yeah, go on.
That's why they also, the Pleiades, that's why I was having a hard time pronouncing it, because they also mentioned the constellation of Orion. And that's where in since they're angels, I guess they could swoop and visit the violets in Orion or see the sunsets in some of the Pleiades. So.
Yeah, they're saying that the way that you think of violets or the other flowers, that's what you're seeing in terms of the planets and solar systems. It's like a garden. All right, now let's do one other thing. Thank you. Let me just get back up to finish.
Okay, all right, we'll sit down.
No, just you'll see where. So we're going to finish now because we're going to take another experiment. How fast does the Earth rotate on its axis? That is to say, how fast are you moving?
How fast am I moving?
Well,
different. Then.
That's right. How fast are we moving around what's the rate of motion of the Earth?
I thought it was like, it's not exactly 24 hours.
Yeah, right.
I know that as much.
But how many miles an hour?
Because it was like 80.
Wow,
No,
that's
How many?
no, it's 80,000.
Out of all my facts, that's when I forget.
Yeah, right, so it's Earth divided by 24 hours.
I can look up the circumference of the
Here's what we're
Earth.
going to do. Here's what everybody's going to do. Everybody's got cell phones, right? All right. So one person look up.
I'll do it.
Okay, that's how fast the Earth is rotating on its axis.
How
Now,
fast is?
somebody else. How fast are we moving around the sun? What's the rate of motion in miles per hour? Who wants to look that up? You'll do it? Okay, right.
I have an answer.
Wait.
I won't say it. Yeah.
Now we're going to get a bunch of answers. Then let's ask the question, how fast is the solar system moving around the galaxy?
It's an unbelievable speed. I've seen simulations
Well, somebody look
of
it up.
Let's quantify it anyway.
Who wants to look up how fast? You'll do it?
Yeah. Mark will do it.
I'll do it?
Yeah.
Do what?
Look up how fast our solar system is
moving around the galaxy.
Moving around the galaxy.
Okay.
What's a galactic year?
Yeah.
That's what.
Basically,
This is
what
travel in the galactic year.
Yeah.
What is a galactic year?
I just read you're wearing a Duran sweatshirt. Okay. Anyway, I'm sorry. Yeah. Hey.
Thank you for noticing.
Okay.
All right. Now, and obviously this is also so for people who are just watching online, you can do the same thing. Obviously, that's sort of a way of getting everybody both to think about something, because how fast are we all moving as we're standing still? That's what we're basically doing here. So what is the rotation?
Okay, so the Earth rotates on its axis at a speed of approximately 1,000 miles per hour, or 1,600 kilometers per hour, at the equator, completing one rotation every 24 hours. So
it's approximate.
Say that again, 1,000 and...
Well, approximately 1,000. They're rounding, but
yeah, rounding. Right. None of this is going to be actually very precise.
But
how about
67,000 miles
an hour? Okay.
You mean around the sun?
60.
Yeah, that we're in a year we're going 67,000 miles an hour.
An hour.
Right.
Okay,
so let's write these down.
We rotate about 1,000 miles an hour.
Okay.
Then we go about the sun.
Right. So that means you got to go 1,000 miles an hour.
And then how do you open this marker?
By the way, while we're writing this, we do have Vega shirts 2%. So.
1,000 miles an hour.
Just a quick commercial break.
How fast is that money coming out of your wallet?
Times 67,000 miles an hour. And what do we have about a galactic year?
It says here the sun, the center of our solar system, orbits the galaxy at a speed of about 230 kilometers per second. Or 514,000 miles per hour.
Okay, times 514,000 miles per hour.
Wow. That's getting per second?
So let's think about that.
True.
1,000 times 67 times 514,000.
Hold on.
Okay. No. Wait. Yeah, we'll do it. Well, we can also.
So you want me to multiply all that together?
I got it.
I can do the math.
We don't. We're not in ancient Greece. We don't need to get the.
It's not that hard.
Okay, 1,000 times.
Add 3 0.
Times 67,000. Oh, 63. Oh.
No, 67.
No, it's 67, right?
Yeah, 67. So it's multiple vectors. I don't know how you would do that.
Okay, it's 67 million.
Okay.
That's the daily rotation compounded with the year.
Compounded with the year.
So you got to multiply that by 514,000.
By 515.
Now I'm getting.
Okay, we have 3.4438 E13.
Okay, the E. I hate when they give you an E because that is its own number in and of itself. It represents its own natural value.
Here we go.
34.
30.
See, even a calculator will. So
okay.
How many zeros is that?
3, 6, 9.
No, wait, but thousands and millions and billions and trillions and zillions. Okay, but it's. How would I simplify that? Okay.
It's.
Hold on.
It's
I've done too much math to let this down.
How fast does the galaxy move?
Can someone Google how fast the galaxy is moving? My phone's in collapse.
3, 6.
The galaxy moving on the center of the. Well, of course, everything's moving opposite of everything else, right? Away from everything else in the universe. But there are probably.
You're right. Do we include like time dilation in this calculation too, or is it, and then like relative to what? Like how?
The Milky Way galaxy is moving at a speed of approximately 1.3 million miles per hour through space.
Oh, like a
With
redshift
the
thing.
majority of this motion directed toward the constellation Hydra.
1.3
Million.
Wait.
miles per hour.
We're moving towards a constellation Hydra. That's what that said.
Yeah, because it's only one galaxy they get right now. We're getting to where we're going. Just one of the.
We're going pretty fast.
Yeah, basically, right?
There's a lot of space to go.
We're doing well. We're doing well.
This is the largest vector, right? So
Yeah.
Everything else is kind of trivial after that.
Okay.
The whole galaxy
So
moving.
one thing that's obvious is that this is hard to conceive of as a fact. I'm not just talking about the fact that we're because of gravity, but
Even with
the
scientific
notion-
notation, the numbers just don't.
Yeah. At one point, they become effectively meaningless.
Right.
All right. Now you notice what was said in the story here.
Pascal's problem.
Look down the abysmal distances. They just mean abysmal.
The abyss.
The abyss, right? Not that it's abysmal. It's not a value judgment. Look down the abysmal distances. Attempt to force the gaze down the multitudinous vistas of the stars as we sweep slowly through them, thus, and thus, and thus. Turning, right? Even the keen spiritual vision, is it not at all points arrested by the continuous golden walls of the universe, the walls of the myriads of the shining bodies, that mere number has appeared to blend into unity?
Oh.
Just how numerous it is, you just
Yeah.
can't differentiate.
It appears to be a unity.
Wow. Like it's
Okay.
all like it's.
Now wait, but let's ask a question. If it were absolutely infinite, then there would only be light.
Oh, right, because it would just blend to where it's only just. Okay, I see. All right, right.
It would be getting brighter and brighter every second.
Right, because if it was just like if it was actually infinite.
You see more stars further away
being created infinitely and thus
They're
creating
light.
more light.
Yeah.
But perhaps it's infinite but countable, which would account for the darkness.
Well, what does that mean?
Yeah. It doesn't mean.
Like the darkness is the space between what you could count. Because it counts
Yeah, right.
as
Because
space.
otherwise, if we're simple, an absolute infinity, right?
That
Then-
would be so dense, yeah.
It'd be so dense, it'd just be light.
It would, right.
Yeah.
That's kind of like what people would consider the inverse of a black hole, or what they assumed the Big Bang was.
We know that there's differentiation. We're seeing differentiation. So we know that things are approachable. You can identify them. So therefore they are, and I'm using innumerable, countable in that sense, innumerable, right? You would use number as a way of attributing the specificity to that particular body or group of bodies. I'm using number in this sense in a very particular way, just as a. But what I'd like to say here about what he's dealing with, look at what he's done to us, just in this 2 pages. That's Edgar Poe. That's who he is. Now, whatever else may have happened in his life, maybe there are bad things, who knows, right? Because people are people. But his power as a writer, is this ability to get us to think in what we're going to call metaphor. In metaphor, something means multiple things at once. And in fact, you want it to mean multiple things at once. It means all of the things that you will attribute to it, even as it means something specific. So this is the idea I just want to say here concerning, and we want the questions. Main thing is the questions. And for people who are online, that's what I think you have to do in a class. It's all about questions. It's not about, certainly not about information. That's like ridiculous as far as I'm concerned. It's about the minds of the people considering how to think and then thinking. And that's what Paul was doing. Now I didn't want to interrupt you.
Sorry, I didn't want to interrupt you. There's at some point when I kept seeing a whole bunch of jokes online. I don't know if this is like a testament to the people my age or just the way the internet works, but a bunch of people would create this these jokes about Helen Keller, right? They're like, oh, she was blind and deaf. How could she do anything? How did she fly a plane? How did she write these books? And they honestly got to me. Like I was just tired of hearing them so many times. And it got to a point where I was like, I'm gonna look for one of her books. If she wrote a book and these people want to say that she did it, then why don't I just find one and read it? What did she write about? What did she care? Like what era did she come? Like questions. And I don't like philosophy. I am one person that will say that when it comes to certain like contemporary or just like if you were to take a philosophy class, the usual syllabus and the usual reading that they give you, I find to be particularly boring. But to read Helen Keller was to think beyond what my senses could give me. There's this one quote that I remember like really clearly because then I had to go and like touch water. Like I literally had to go and think of it myself. Like if she said that her house having 3 doors, as in describing herself as a house in which she only had 3 senses. If her house had 3 doors, that doesn't mean that her house is any less full and vibrant and imaginative than the rest of us who have 5, who have all 5 of our senses. And there are other points where she would say that she expressed this point that she, as a human being, like everyone else, has this sense of self. She has this sense of being. She was able to describe her the difference between when she didn't really read or write or have that those cognizant like feelings, and then the moments where she was able to say, this is me, and this is the difference between me and water. These are things outside of myself. There is an I and there is this. So where does that stand beyond how I think? Then she for herself created questions that she could then learn and answer. And it frustrated me so much to hear people say that because you are not able to see or hear, you don't have a sense of self. But then I see many people who have all of our senses and all of our fingers and toes, and then we don't think. We don't put ourselves to think. And it's not like we can't. It's kind of like some people are forced to because they have no other chance. Some people feel galvanized to bring themselves into having more knowledge, and it always frustrates me when the people choose not to. I was wondering if anyone else had seen situations like that where they would. I thought it was similar to Edgar Allan Poe in that sense because her image was slandered constantly, and I was really tired of it. And it's like, okay, this is a dead disabled woman. I don't understand where the joke is, and I think it's just going to give me something else to read.
Anybody want to talk about that? I can tell you what you referred to. This is very important because the sensorium, what people call it the 5 senses, right?
Yeah.
There are way more than that. There are a lot more than that. It's something we can take up But I'm not going to do it because actually there's an article, several articles that some of our people who looked into the Keller case in particular, because it was extremely important, because the mind is not the brain. Now, a lot of the artificial intelligence people will get very upset, but the mind is not the brain. And there is a question that one should pose, because after all, certainly there's a whole other book that Poe wrote called Eureka, and we'll talk about that, in which he tries to talk about what he calls the origin of the universe, how he thinks of it being transitioned, extinguished, how he thinks about the whole idea of death and why death is actually a necessary, it's an embedded part of a living process. But I'm not going to go through those. I'm just indicating it because you're talking about the notion of identity. And one of the famous examples that people are aware of, they've heard of it, is Beethoven. He loses his hearing, and he keeps writing music. But not only does he keep writing music, he's writing more complex music. And then he's writing music that he can't hear. But he clearly is doing that in some fashion that therefore implies that the music is not contingent upon hearing as we think of it. Maybe the music is not in what we hear, the way we hear. Now that gets very interesting, I think, in terms of a general, but I think the reason I'd like to, let me also just pose to people, everybody knows about the idea that there may be as many as 2 trillion plus galaxies, and that's only in the part of the universe that we can see.
Yes.
So we're talking about extraordinary speeds. For example, it takes 100,000 light years to go across the Milky Way, which means if we were traveling at the speed of light, it would take us 100,000 years to do that. Well, that means that if you're going to do a lot of traveling across the galaxies, you've got to somehow go a lot faster than the speed of light. Sort of interesting, because it must be possible, because there are entities that are moving and are in the universe moving, and we can conceive of the idea of doing such a thing. You wouldn't be able to conceive of it were it not possible. You can conceive of things that are absurd, of course, but then they contradict. Therefore, you can, right, you cancel them out. But the conception here is that we must not be limited to, by then of the fact that we can conceive of something like I just said, we couldn't be limited to our physical existence, either in space or time. Even though I am not saying that we are therefore immortal, in the sense that we are immortal as we are. That I don't have. Now I'm not contradicting other people that may think that's the case. They may have reasons, and they may be able to give me reasons for that. What I am saying is, what Poe is doing in this, and he calls the story, remember, the power of words. We didn't get to the end, and we can do that in the next class, because there's a kind of, he says something about it, and I'll just refer to that quickly, just so we don't leave things completely. He says, "Let me endeavor, my onos, to lead you step by step to the conception I intend. You are well aware that as no thought can perish, say no thought can die, so no act is without infinite results. We moved our hands, for example, when we were dwellers on the earth, and in so doing, we gave vibration to the atmosphere which engirdled it. This vibration was indefinitely extended till it gave impulse to every particle of the earth's air, which thenceforward and forever was actuated by the one movement of the hand. He goes on and says other things, but I want to stop here and say something just to take something up for you. Because I don't like going past things that, can be challenged. You are well aware that as no thought can perish, so no act is without infinite result. Well, let's get this point about thoughts not perishing. The theologian Augustine posed this question. He said, okay, let's think about a circle, not like a geometric circle, but not like a physical circle simply, but a circle in our mind. And now let's think about the idea of the line drawn through the circle, the diameter, as it's called. And we will do this physically next time so that this makes a different kind of sense. He said, if the line drawn through the circle called the diameter is the longest, and in other words, if you try to divide that circle with any other line running parallel to it, all other lines will be shorter. Okay? As long as it goes through the center, it's always the longest. But you can start any place on the circumference of that circle on the edge, and as long as you connect its opposite point through the center, that will be the diameter. So the diameter on the one hand is of one species, or you can start drawing it, any place you want, as long as it goes through the center, it's going to be a diameter. And all other lines that would be drawn, all other divisions of the circle, will be of another species. Okay. Then he says this. Is that ever not true? Is once you say that is the case, is there ever a case where you can reverse that, where the diameter is not different in its species nature from all the other lines, which all have to be shorter than it? It says if the answer is no, then it means that is permanently so. That will always be so. Matter of fact, it was so before you said it. And it will be so if you die. Then he says this. Now, if that is true, and that is an idea that cannot die, it's always going to be that. I have a problem, he said. That idea is now inside of your mind. A container is always bigger than the thing it contains. If you have an idea that can't die in your mind, how is your mind smaller than that idea that can't die? All right, so now these are the sorts of matters that come up in thinking about Edgar Poe. And I would suggest to you that the reason that people think he's weird, he's a drunk, he's an addict, besides the fact that he lived in the Bronx, which might be a lot of the reason they're against him, is probably because they don't want other people thinking these things.
I mean, if people really were able to read these things and say, oh, our hero of the Bronx, Edgar Allan Poe, he wasn't a drunk, he wasn't an addict, he wasn't any of this. He was a writer.
And that would be a revolutionary act.
But now then, everything we laid out here.
Yeah, why don't you come up so people can see you when you're talking, because we're sort of concluding.
I mean, everything you laid out here, that especially what we got just from the few pages of The Power of Words. How can well, first of all, okay, shit. There's more I wanted to say. Than I thought.
Oh, go ahead.
Well, first of all, how would anybody know what is the right version from the beginning? The beginning, you were play these two different versions. How could anyone actually know which one is right or wrong? But more importantly, how could anyone even begin to understand the concept of what was said there just on so as no thought could perish? Because I have this thing, and I'm sure other people do, where they read that and they're like, okay, and then they just gloss over it and they don't even think about it, right? It's like, okay, how? But then you brought in Augustus. How could then somebody who finds a book of Edgar Poe 100 years from now, hopefully our culture isn't too rotten, but let's say it is, on what does Poe give to the reader, I guess then the assumption is that Poe is not thinking he's giving this to somebody he's making an assumption. I would think he's making an assumption on the reader that the reader is coming in with some idea of philosophy, theology, and is educated.
No, you said several things there. I don't think so at all. He gave lectures of Eureka, which we haven't even gotten to. He would do it over a 6-hour, 7-hour period. He'd stand up there and he just do the book. He thought anybody could get it. As for the answer to your other question, which is how would people know the right versions? Well, that takes us to, Denzel Washington in the Book of Eli. I mean, you have to you gotta have like
movie where he had the Bible.
Yeah. He was blind, right? And he was trying to get to the only place where they had the books archived, and it was Alcatraz. Right? Alcatraz was the only place on earth, right, where you still had books.
Right.
And so the whole point was that people were trying to break into Alcatraz, right, to get the book. So what I mean is,
what do you mean?
we have to do that.
Can I see
we have to do that.
Notes you had for the class?
We have to archive.
Schematics.
I have to archive. And you have to archive.
No, we have to be the archives. We have to do it. Seriously.
Librarians.
We're the book people.
Yeah, but it can't be digital. I mean, I don't know. You may not have heard this, but like the Internet Archive was hacked.
The internet, I am beyond.
You heard about this, right?
Oh yeah, I had one and it just stopped. The book stopped in the middle.
They hacked the one site because they were it was one of the lies. They were convinced that somehow the Internet Archive had something to do with the government, and then they're giving books for free. I'm angry with this, so they hacked it. I have no.
They also shut down Library Genesis.
I have no other clue other than just like the madness that possesses people when they are overcome with lies.
Yeah.
Because it's a digital library. Imagine going to your local library and just burning it down, kicking through the doors, and just like, oh, the government gave me books. And I can't.
So, of course, I have a lot of these.
Yes.
Okay? That's how I roll.
A lot of your DVDs. Physical media.
All right, it's
so you may want to,
Yeah, let me just see here. It's 7:55. We've never gone this long before, but I mean, if people are vibing, it's okay. We can keep if people have questions. People seem to want to discuss things though. I mean,
I think this is fine. I think we should.
We should just or at least we can. You know what? We can conclude the live stream part of this.
Yeah.
So, what? Oh, an end card.
Yeah.
Oh, we have an end card now. Oh yeah. Okay. Kynan, our tech guy who's in the other room. I'm gonna hold this up, and then when it gets fully in frame, thanks everyone for tuning in. Just like end the. You can end the stream when it's like. There we go. I got it. You can. Oh, the QR code. Oh, okay. There we go. Oh, here we go. Okay. All right. Push.